Hey, how's it going? It's Nick here, and it's been a little too quiet at school. We need a little bit of chaos in here. And so when we ran out of whiting for this little ink shelf, I decided it would be the perfect spot to put a tiny little gallery. And so I'm going to string you all along for the process. First up is the floor, because that's the easiest part. I'm going to take this bigger sheet of vinyl to make a base, and then I'm going to take this kind of wood texture shelf liner, and I'm going to cut it up into little strips, and then I'm just going to go ahead and start placing them kind of like little wood floor planks. If I just used solid wood grain vinyl, it looks a little weird. It doesn't really look like wood flooring, it just looks like one big piece of wood. It also helps me quickly install it as one piece, rather than me having to sit on location and slowly putting these little panels down one by one. And I'm going to vary the gaps in between these panels and just kind of the distance and placement, just so it just kind of looks a little kind of like intentionally bad. If it was too smooth and too neat, then it's gonna look a little unreal. But you know, you gotta give it that little like dirty, grungy look for it to look like a good, nice hardwood floor. Next up are the walls, and luckily Home Depot had some nice 6-inch wide sheet steel, and so the shelf was only 6 inches tall, so I don't really have to do anything to that. And I thought I would go ahead and try to bend this into an L shape, because I've used a press brake before, and you can give you some nice clean corners, so I thought I could do that at home. If anyone has tried this at home, you kind of find out why a press brake is important and expensive and worth it, because it did not go very well. And so I got this horrible round L-shaped piece of steel, not the quite crisp corner that I was thinking of, and so I went ahead, flattened it back out, and I decided, you know, I'm just going to cut it into 2 pieces and then just tape it to a nice sharp corner. And you might have noticed in this gallery, it's a little dark in that back corner. And so of course we're going to need a little ceiling light for the artworks. And so I need a little space on the top where I can hide a little cavity for the battery. And in the past I used to make this out of foam core and mat board, but now I've got a 3D printer. And so I made up this tiny little kind of shape of the gallery, and it's got a little cavity built in and a hole where I can stick a light through, and a little button and a switch for where the light switch is going to be. So let's go ahead and work on those electronics. And so I'm just going to wire up a simple loop. I've got a little 9-volt battery connector right here that's going to power the whole thing, and I've got a little end stop switch left over from my 3D printer project, and it's just going to be a little on off button, and it has a nice little clicky noise to it. And then just a tiny little LED. And so I'm just gonna wire these up into one big loop, and you know, the pushing the end stop switch is just gonna complete the circuit. Easy peasy. Now we're finally gonna be able to put this all together. I'm using steel for the walls because I want to be able to stick magnets to them, but I don't want the walls to look like steel, and so I'm gonna go ahead and clean them, and I'm gonna sand it so I can glue a piece of paper to it to give it a nice, you know, soft white wall texture to it. So once it's been all sanded and roughed up, I'm going to go ahead and use some super glue and kind of glue this into an L shape around the top part that I built. I really like this cyano acrylate glue that I have. Man, this thing sticks almost anything to anything, and I just love it so much. So just a quick hold in place, and then it's pretty much set in like less than a minute. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue up the next corner of this. And now I've got myself a nice little corner that I can just slide into that little spot. Now, I thought about spray painting the walls white, but I was worried maybe if it got scratched from the magnets, then, you know, it would be difficult to repair. Whereas paper, you know, it's just scuffs, but like, you know, it's not going to turn back into the metal color unless you tear all the way through it. So I just took this sheet of paper that was a little bit longer than it needed to be, and I just kind of sprayed some spray adhesive on one side, and then I just kind of stuck it down into this corner, gave it a good nice little firm pressing, and it's starting to come together. I'm going to go ahead and fold back the paper around the edge so I don't have a sharp metal edge just kind of sticking out of this, and then I'm going to use my utility knife and just kind of trim off this excess. And to keep this looking a little bit more like a gallery wall space than a solitary confinement space, I'm gonna go ahead and add some wood strips to the bottom to make a little bit of a floor trim, you know? Now, I already left the hardware store after I bought the metal sheets, and I forgot to buy like dollhouse like miniature trimming, and it would have been so cute, but I was not gonna drive back to the store. So I had these little like bamboo pieces that I use as stir sticks, and I figured I could just glue this down and then cut off the excess. And so I went ahead and took this and cut it off, a little bit of super glue, and stuck it down to that nice little piece of paper interface, and we've got ourselves some nice little foil trims. Now that all the pieces are ready, we're ready for a nice, quick, stealthy install. So we're going to start by sticking down the kind of vinyl flooring sheet. Easy peasy, just kind of comes down in one piece. I'm going to go ahead and press it down, and I'll come back in later and trim this kind of flush to the edge of the shelf. Next up, the kind of rest of the unit just kind of slides in nice and easy, just like that. And then a quick test to see that everything's working. So I went ahead and pressed this little light here, and that works. And I trimmed up the excess vinyl from the flooring so it sits nice and flush from the shelf. And for our first exhibition, I have this little paper pig that I had sealed away in this little magnet jar. So after we're gonna unseal him, we're gonna go ahead and give him some fresh air and give him the glory that he deserves by putting him on this pedestal with a tiny little spotlight just for him. He's just going to be a little temporary exhibition. I want to put some student artwork up. My students are working on some wood engravings, and so it would be nice to put some tiny wood engravings in a tiny little gallery. But for now, Mr. Big's here to fill the void. And so far, I'm pretty happy with it. He's like a little diorama of like some sort of like apartment complex, and just a little shelf gallery is one of the rooms up in here. And after gaslighting my students for a week and telling them that I didn't make this, we finally had our little wood engraving critique, and we decided to put up some artwork in the little gallery. So tiny little wood engravings and even smaller magnets to go ahead and attach them to the walls. Originally, I was going to 3D print the entire room and just use magnets on the other side of the wall and just kind of have it work like that. But these tiny little magnets couldn't quite, stick it to each other through the walls. They were just so weak. And so I ended up having to do the steel walls, which ultimately I'm pretty happy with. And I don't know, these tiny little magnets just look so cute. And I already spent $16 on the bottle, and so I wasn't going to return them. But ultimately, these tiny little magnets got a lot of hold to this steel walls, and so I think this was the right decision of how to make it, even though I spent like $6 on that piece of steel. And I was just gonna have artwork on the walls just like this, but my students insisted that the pig stay in the gallery. I couldn't evict him from his little gallery apartment, so I went ahead and I put him back, and my students added a few additions to the little gallery, like this world's tiniest little Tic Tac container, and this little spider with a green little Mardi Gras baby on top of it, I guess. And now we have a well-rounded exhibition with some 3D work and some 2D work tucked away in a nice quiet little corner of the print shop. So I hope you enjoyed this process. Maybe it'll inspire you to make your own tiny little gallery in a spot that it doesn't really belong. And let me know if you like these little printmaking adjacent side adventures. But until next time, keep on printing, and don't forget to turn off your hot plate before you go home.